Yes, I move that the City Council present a resolution to the mayor to rescind the vaccination executive order for first responders, firefighters. I can read the resolution out loud.
I can read it into the record. I have it in front of me, if you wouldn't mind.
Not at all.
Text of resolution, whereas the COVID-19 pandemic has been an incredible strain on first responders across the United States and around the world, and whereas the first COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 cases in the United States were responded to by Redmond and Kirkland firefighter EMTs, and whereas the Redmond Fire Department has had chronic overtime issues with obvious budgetary impacts, but more importantly, increased strain on valued personnel, and whereas losing experienced and talented firefighters EMTs from the Redmond Fire Department will continue to add to the stress of our fire service, and whereas Redmond firefighter EMTs have performed their duties for 2 years by taking pandemic precautionary measures to prevent transmission to vulnerable populations, and whereas current and substantial scientific studies of medically accredited institutions have determined that vaccine effectiveness had conclusively demonstrated the benefit of COVID-19 vaccines in reducing severe disease and hospitalizations. However, the impact of vaccines regarding community transmission of SARS-CoV-2 among vaccinated and unvaccinated is not significant. Whereas the affected firefighter EMTs have received exemptions and deserve to be accommodated by a combination of testing and proper masking to protect the patients they serve, just as vaccinated firefighter EMTs should be accommodated based on their potential for public transmissibility of SARS-CoV-2 during the first responder duties. And whereas Washington State has no COVID vaccine requirements for EMT licensure, and whereas King County Macon 1's program medical director, Dr. Thomas Ray, letter regarding EMT personnel and COVID vaccination is a recommendation, not a requirement. And whereas receiving a vaccine is a personal decision that is undertaken by consulting one's own conscience, informed by worldview, religious beliefs, and or medical professionals, and whereas the elimination of one's livelihood by the city of an employee's private medical decision should be considered with the utmost carefulness and reliance on current available scientific data to determine if potential harm to the public welfare is threatened. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Redmond City Council that the executive order requiring vaccines of Redmond firefighter EMTs be rescinded. And be it further resolved that any firefighter EMT terminated after January 1st, 2022, due to this policy being reinstated at their previous rank and pay. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Council Member Fields.
Thank you, Mayor. So please bear with me for a minute. I will be quick. But this, as somebody said earlier, is a very emotional issue. And I also will have a difficult time getting through this because I have spent a long time thinking about this and talking to some of the impacted firefighters and listening to your testimony. And I know what I think is right. So I'm going to lay that out as quickly as I can. I recognize the decision that the mayor made some months ago was difficult. There was limited and fast-moving information. Emotions were very high, and there were serious consequences, both losing valued and treasured firefighters stacked up against the needs for public safety and public health safety. I feel like my family was on the forefront of the COVID-19 pandemic. We own a business. We were shut down. We lost our income. I was calling the governor's office once a week saying, hey, you can shut down, but what about mitigating the impact on small businesses? So when they started talking about a vaccine, I was very hopeful. And I just wanted to hang on to our business so that someday things would go back to normal. I also lost my father-in-law who couldn't get a intensive care bed because it was full of COVID patients. And I have a nephew who's an intern in Las Vegas, medical intern, and he has watched dozens of people die of COVID, and I've had many conversations with him. I also have a daughter who is a leukemia survivor and spent months very isolated to stay away from endangering her health. So I had very strong feelings. So when the vaccines became available, we all thought that we no longer were at transmission risk. I had friends who would say, yeah, come on over. Did you get a vaccination? I'd say, yeah. So we all got together and with family and friends. Well, that quickly changed. Data became available that I was just as likely to transmit COVID-19 as someone who wasn't vaccinated. And that data has evolved over time to the point that it's negligible and maybe statistically not meaningful, that if you're vaccinated or unvaccinated, you pose the same risk to the other people in your community. And the current data is very clear. The impact on our community, the impact on our city, the consequences of people losing their jobs, their families, their health care, these are something that I can't ignore. I can't ignore in good conscience. This is an issue of practicality, but it is more for me an issue of conscience. I want the city to do the right thing, and I heard testimony asking the council to do the right thing. So, given the fact that accommodations, both for vaccinated and unvaccinated, will yield the same results, we need to be as careful as you all being the firefighters out there, have been and intend to be. And I see no reason, even though I don't necessarily agree. I am vaccinated, I am boosted, my family is vaccinated. Those are my choices. Even though I don't necessarily agree with your choice, I respect that choice, and I also respect the fact that it is not creating a health risk for the public that you serve. And I ask my fellow council members to examine their own consciousness, whatever that is, their values, and come to a conclusion that, let's do the right thing here. Enough's enough. The pandemic has inflicted a lot of pain. Why are we continuing to inflict pain on one another with no benefit? So I respect and admire the work you've done. I respect and admire your willingness to come back to the city, and I hope that tonight will resolve that.
Thank you, Council Member. I just want to correct a little bit of erroneous information you just shared. So I just looked on the King County dashboard, and according to it, in the last 30 days, if you are unvaccinated, you are 7 times more likely to test positive for COVID. You're 40 times more likely to be hospitalized for COVID, and you're 32 times more likely to die of COVID. And so I just want to correct the record on some of the information that was shared that was not correct.
So, Mayor, I appreciate that. However, I never said that there wasn't a higher risk for the individual who is not vaccinated. In fact, in the resolution, I mentioned that, and I will reread it if you don't mind. So I didn't, in fact, share false information because I never said what you just described. What I said was, it is conclusively demonstrated the benefits of COVID-19 vaccines in reducing severe disease and hospitalizations. That's been borne out. What you said is true. What you said that's not true is that I said that. However, the impact of vaccines regarding community transmission of SARS-CoV-2 among vaccinated and unvaccinated is not significant. So yes, you are taking a personal risk by not being vaccinated, but you're not posing a community risk.
Councilmember Kritzer.
Thank you very much. And I want to start just by saying thank you to everyone who has come and shared their stories with us, and to recognize the really incredible service that each and every one of our firefighters have given to our city over time, and just to be able to express that appreciation for the work that all of our firefighters have done, especially during this really challenging past 2 years. And I have listened and thought about this, and also talked with other current firefighters, as well as community members, and listened to as well dozens of community members that have written saying that they want to make sure that they know that if they get a health service from the city, that they are getting the highest level of protection as possible, and weighed all of these different factors. And I cannot support this resolution. First of all, I disagree on that particular clause on the whereas around whether there's an impact of vaccines on community transmissions. There's substantial data out there showing that that being vaccinated does affect a level of transmission. It's part of the reason that we have a rollback right now of things like mask mandates, is because we have a high level of vaccination in our community, and that's a huge piece of it. And I do want to address the issue that this is in the past just because we've had some changes in regulations. This pandemic, unfortunately, as much as we wish it would be, it's not over. Entire countries in the last month have shut down due to the BA.2 variant of Omicron. And I think our community does rely on us as their leaders to be able to look broadly for our 73,000 residents at what are the best public health best practices we can do, what are the scientific practices that we can follow, and listen to scientific professionals that tell us what are the best practices there. The governor's mandate at the state level has not been rescinded on vaccines for public health workers. And for me, in thinking about the responsibility as a city council member who cares deeply about looking at data and science in the way that we lead, I think it's very important for us to be able to follow that, especially when, although we have heard examples of other fire departments that have decided to allow, or other healthcare areas that have decided to allow people who are unvaccinated to work there. I don't want to tell our residents here in Redmond that if they lived in any one of the 38 other cities in King County, when they are in a moment of crisis and they have a firefighter come help them with their medical needs, in every one of those other cities in King County, those firefighters have to be vaccinated. And I don't want to tell them that only in Redmond they wouldn't have that protection, especially for those who, when they're in their most vulnerable state, they may have children under 5 who are unvaccinated, even if they wanted them to be. I know personally because I have a daughter who is in that position, and I'm afraid for her every day. And, you know, I don't want to have to tell that to people who are immunocompromised. I want to tell them that we have done what we can to ensure that as they get their care, we've given them their best shot at having this support for public health. Again, truly respect the compassion from my fellow council members wanting to bring this up, and I hope you can understand my compassion and appreciation for all the work for all of you, and a respect for exactly what your philosophy is on this. But I think as city leaders, it's important for us to maintain this policy in our city, and I will be voting no on this resolution.
Councilmember Carson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I do support this motion. We are in a much different time than we were 6 months ago, and I think we know a lot more. We've seen a lot more data come in to deal with some of the questions that we all had. I think going back real quickly to 2020, when we didn't have any vaccines, when we were hopeful that a vaccine would tame the coronavirus and basically, turn things back to the good old days where we could all be together and not worry about infecting each other and so forth. And that vaccine was developed. We had high hopes that it would be something that would prevent transmission. It doesn't do that. It also doesn't live up to the hopes that we had that it would keep you from getting sick at all. I was vaccinated. And I got COVID in December and long into January, and it's a pretty significant issue to deal with medically when I have some underlying conditions that could be real serious consequences for me. So, but at the same time, we hope for all those things. The only thing that came out of the vaccine development is it's shown to protect the individual from a serious case. I wouldn't want to have not had the vaccine on board myself. That's my own choice. Again, none of us has the same identical medical history. So it made sense for me to have a vaccine. Other people are different. I'm virtually the only one in my family that's vaccinated. So we had high hopes for the vaccine that have not been borne out. It does not protect from transmission. It doesn't protect you from getting it. It just basically mitigates some of the symptoms. The second point I'd like to make is that back in September, when this was issued by the mayor, there weren't any departments that were, there were few, if any, departments, and certainly none in probably the metro area that were allowing firefighters to not be vaccinated. But that's changed significantly when I think a lot of departments saw the writing on the wall. They saw what it was going to do to their workforce. They saw that they were not going to be able to meet the mandatory minimum staffing requirements that all departments have, and so they rethought this policy because it simply doesn't live up to the billing. I think lastly, the last point I'd make is that terminating employees under this executive order will have a substantial impact, financial and morale, to the city of Redmond in the form of firefighter overtime, increased training costs to train up new firefighters that will replace them, and it's almost certain that we will have to defend this position, which I think looks less and less defensible. So, and I mean legally. So, I can't support the policy continuing the way it is, and so I will be supporting this resolution.
You want to comment on this? I see your hand. Just a moment. Did you want to comment on this? Oh, let's see. Councilmember Fields.
So yeah, I want to comment on a couple of things that council members have said. One council member had said that she doesn't believe the data about transmissibility. There was a study from the CDC in Texas. There was a study by Israel, which is very well received and very well respected. There was a study in California. These are all accredited. I don't think there's a whole lot of debate if you actually do the research on the public health community and the medical community. In fact, the doctor, my nephew, that I mentioned is the one, even though he was really angry at people who didn't get COVID because he had to watch, or get the vaccine because he had to watch them die, he is the one that sent me most of those studies and said that we need to relook at the mandatory vaccination. And I believe it's actually dangerous to rely on it. The other thing I would say is I would be proud if the city of Redmond is the only city in King County that did the right thing. So if the other cities don't want to consider this, it doesn't influence me. And I think that the issue is the effectiveness of the executive order, and it's not doing what it was thought it was going to do back when it was done. It's time to make a change. I asked the mayor 2 weeks ago. I didn't get an answer. You're going to hear from the city attorney soon, I believe, on whether we actually have the power to rescind this. All I can say is, I'm sorry.
Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. I will be direct. I believe clarity is kindness, and I will not be supporting this motion tonight. My take on it is a bit different than the take that's been offered so far, and that's why I'm raising my voice. I'm always going to be hesitant to interfere in a staffing issue because I don't believe that is council's jurisdiction on an average day. The guidance that council has received, legal guidance, I should say, to this point, backs up that there is quite a bit of risk and complication should this decision be made. So because it is a staffing issue, that's my number one hesitation. As I weigh many of the other factors, I want to say to the advocates, I know what it feels like to lose because I've been an advocate myself. And so if you don't prevail tonight, I do hope you keep going on the issues that are important to you, because that is how together we make progress. And if we're not able to do that together tonight in that way, I would just encourage you to go forward, because I've been very impressed by how comprehensive you all are. If this was a decision that I could wrestle with on your side. And lastly, I will just say, members of this body have the privilege to not attend meetings in chambers due to the ongoing impacts of the pandemic. That's not something that we can ever extend to our firefighters or other first responders. So once again, I will be voting no on this motion. Thank you.
Any other comments this evening? Council Member Anderson.
Thanks to the folks in the audience for your service. I stand with the Redmond firefighters and honor you, and I do not care one bit if you are vaccinated and if I am dying in my house. I am proud of you, I appreciate you, and I thank you for the invitation to participate in overturning executive authority, but she is 1,000% within her authority. And I can agree with you, and I can also vote against this measure. So at this time, I would like to make a motion to postpone this measure indefinitely.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to postpone this indefinitely. Councilmember Anderson, would you like to speak to that?
Yep. I think Ms. Stewart mentioned a couple of these things, and it is my advice to the council to remain neutral in personnel matters is respect to the audience as well as to the council and to the positions that we hold. and to the community in general. If this matter does become legal in nature at some time in the future, it's very confusing to me to look at the timing as that's proposed, as well as understanding the impacts either of the mandate itself, what that consideration was, and then what's going to happen going forward. My advice is to remain neutral, and one of the ways we can do that is by postponing this matter. If we need to take it up in the future, we certainly could.
Councilmember Carson?
Thank you. So I don't support this postponing it indefinitely because the firefighters that are at risk of losing their job don't have an indefinite amount of time. I concur with Councilmember Anderson's initial statement where she says, vaccinated or unvaccinated, I want you to come and take me to the hospital if I need it, which Redmond Fire has done on 2 occasions with me. So I have experience with this. And one time I didn't even get my pants on before they showed up. So that's how quick they were, which was a little bit embarrassing. So I don't see how kicking the can down the road does anything for the issue or for those at risk of losing their livelihoods in our city. So I will not be supporting this.
Council Vice President Kritzer?
Question for Mr. Haney or perhaps our clerk. Is there a substantial difference between postponing indefinitely and voting down this resolution?
Mr. Haney?
I think the excuse me. I think the answer is no. The motion to postpone, or the motion to voting down the resolution would require a motion for reconsideration if you were to want to bring it up again at some future date. The motion to postpone indefinitely postpones the matter and essentially kills it. So it has the same net effect, but it's not. It doesn't bring it back on reconsideration. And perhaps the city clerk has. Do you have anything additional to say? Okay. Does that make sense? Okay, good.
Point of order, Ms.
Point of order, yeah. So the motion postponed indefinitely is a majority vote, is that correct? And can you clarify if we need 2/3 to overturn an EO?
No, a motion to postpone indefinitely is a majority vote.
Okay. And then can you also confirm it's a 2/3 vote to overturn an executive order?
No, I think you're thinking of the motion to take from the table. Is that correct? Or is it, do you recall if it's a 2/3 majority on a motion to postpone, to overturn it?
I think in the legislature it is.
I don't recall that it is.
I think she's asking to overturn my executive order. Do they need 2/3 to do that?
I'm sorry, are you asking whether overturning the motion to postpone indefinitely takes a 2/3 majority, or are you asking if overturning the mayor's
In the main
executive
motion,
order?
how many votes are needed for the main motion to pass?
The main motion being
The resolution.
to the resolution. A resolution can be passed by a majority of the council.
Okay, thank you. Is the resolution enforceable if it is contrary to RMC 2.02?
In my opinion, the answer is no.
Thank you.
And I can elaborate on that if
Yeah.
you would like.
Thank you.
You know, first I want to say that I understand that what I'm about to say will not be popular with many people who are in this room, but it is not my job as city attorney to be popular and to give you popular opinions. It is also not my job to give you opinions relating to the science, as I'm not a scientist. and it's not my job to give you opinions relating to the effect of firefighter vaccinations on the fire service or on the operations of the department or on any other policy matter. It is my sole job to give you legal opinions, and I give those as objectively and as fully as I can. In my opinion, the resolution that has been proposed is not authorized under the Redmond Municipal Code. And that is so because the City Council has, under the Redmond Municipal Code, specifically Chapter 2.02 of the Redmond Municipal Code, the Council has adopted the personnel manual and the personnel rules contained in Chapter 2.02 as the working conditions of all of the city's employees. There are certain exceptions to that, but the firefighters do not fall within those exceptions. The city code also provides, the personnel manual that's been adopted by the city code provides specifically that the city is to reasonably accommodate individuals with sincerely held religious beliefs, and that the city is to reasonably accommodate individuals with disabilities. That is a requirement of federal law, of state law, and it is a requirement of the Redmond Personnel Manual. The Redmond City Code says that the mayor is the administrator of the Redmond Personnel Manual. And it says that the mayor shall administer the manual and administer the rules under the personnel system. All of the provisions of Chapter 2.02 and all of the personnel rules, quote, not specifically reserved to the City Council. The way that I read the personnel manual and the code is that the mayor has the authority to administer the personnel manual, and particularly to administer the reasonable accommodation provisions of the manual, and that the council has not reserved, either in the code or in the manual itself, the authority to override the mayor's decision and to make reasonable accommodation decisions itself. And for that reason, it is my opinion under the municipal code that the council that the council does not have the authority under the code to override the mayor's decision. And again, I'm not opining on the policy, whether anything is a wise decision, unwise decision. I'm simply telling you what the code says, and legally it says that this is within the authority of the mayor to make that decision. I would also say that even if the mayor's decision or executive order were overridden, there is still the obligation under the governor's proclamation, Proclamation 21-14, which the governor recently reaffirmed on March 23rd with Proclamation 21-14.4. And that proclamation says that firefighters are to be vaccinated. They're defined as people who are working in a healthcare setting. That proclamation also requires a number of other state employees to be vaccinated, and it also requires certain other city employees to be vaccinated. It requires that city employees who work in the Parks and Recreation Department and who provide educational services or youth programs, they are required to be vaccinated. So it's not just firefighters. There's a number of different people who are required to be vaccinated. The proclamation also says that in each case, there must be an individualized determination and assessment of an individual's request for accommodation and whether or not the city can accommodate. And it says that the city must accommodate unless there is an undue hardship. So that's essentially what the mayor's executive order says as well, is she directed in the executive order that the human resources director was to meet with all of the affected employees who were requesting a religious accommodation and to make an individualized assessment of that accommodation request and to make decisions relating to those accommodations. So the mayor's order is consistent with the proclamation of the governor, which remains in effect. So for that reason, in my opinion, the council does not have the authority to rescind the mayor's executive order, and even if it did, we would still be in the same position, having to administer the governor's proclamation. So,
Thank you. Councilmember Fields?
So we're a little bit off of parliamentary procedure here, but I'm okay with it. I do have a question for the attorney. Can the city council vote tonight to urge the mayor to rescind her executive order? Is that within our authority?
yes, the council always has the authority to express its opinion on any issue and to urge the mayor to take certain action. It just doesn't have the authority to require her to do that under the current code.
Okay, thank you. So I am strongly against Councilmember Anderson's amendment because that takes, in effect, I mean, the city attorney expressed it very well. It basically just puts it in a black hole and no further discussion. I think that some clever council member could amend the basic amendment, some experienced, clever council member, to urge the mayor, and she would then know the majority of the council's opinion. So following parliamentary procedure, we have the amendment to postpone. I urge the council to vote no, and then we move on and see if there is any amendment. Thank you.
And it's actually a motion to postpone indefinitely, not an amendment.
Correct.
Councilmember Anderson?
Sure, I'll speak to the motion to postpone indefinitely and again caution the council not to take a position for or against any staff, especially specific ones, since at a future time they may take up a case where we are supposed to stay neutral on their behalf. Just like it was her choice to put the mandate in place, the mayor can also choose to remove it. It is better if you do not take a position on the record. And in our rules of procedure, according to the duties of a council member in matters of administration, the first role is input, and it is if it is requested. And I do not recall her asking for our advice in this matter.
Councilmember Carson?
Thank you. Well, I would say this is a policy matter that not simply a personnel matter, that the council does have the purview. And I find it incredible that the council could delegate the responsibility for the manual, but not see a specific policy in the manual that potentially the council disagrees with, and not take some remedy to change that policy. So I'm kind of at a loss to understand exactly the totality of Mr. Haney's position on this, because to me it seems pretty clear that the council has the policy purview, and if the council has been silent on an issue, on a policy issue, and then any mayor creates an executive order that basically fleshes out a policy, and the council disagrees with it, I can't imagine that it would not be the council's right to take on that policy and change it. So maybe you can explain kind of my conundrum there.
Mr. Haney?
Yeah, what I would say is this, is that as I understand the motion, it is not to amend the personnel manual. And if you were asking to amend the personnel manual, yes, you can amend the personnel manual. The code does say that. Your amendment would have to be consistent with state law and with federal law. And currently the personnel manual says that the city has an obligation to reasonably accommodate individuals with sincerely held religious beliefs and with disabilities. So the manual is consistent with state law and with federal law. The mayor is administering the manual, and at this point you have not provided in the manual or in the code any process whereby the council makes personnel decisions or would say that we disagree with the mayor's specific position on an individual accommodation, which is what the mayor's executive order and the manual requires, and we therefore overrule the mayor. That's an administration of the manual. If you want to amend the manual, the council does have authority to consider amendments to the manual. I would suggest that if you wanted to amend the manual, that you would want to look carefully at what amendment you wanted to make and make sure that that is consistent with federal law and with state law. But I don't think I'm saying anything different from what you are. You have the authority to amend the manual.
Council President Forsyth, I saw your hand up. Did you not have a comment? No. So the motion on the floor is motion to postpone indefinitely. Any more discussion? Seeing none, this is a roll call vote, starting with Council President Forsyth.
Aye.
No.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
No.
And motion to postpone indefinitely passes 5-2.